to order this, the Silicon Valley Clean Energy Authority Board of Directors meeting on Wednesday, September 9th. We are operating under special COVID-19 rules that allow us to run these meetings remotely. We're using the Zoom platform. Members of the public may attend the meeting and participate in the meeting at the appropriate times. You'll indicate your desire to participate by raising your virtual hand, or if you're on the phone, by pressing *9. And I will now turn this over to the clerk to find out if there's anything I missed in our COVID announcement and for a roll call.
Thank you so much. You covered everything, and I'll go ahead and start with our roll call. Chair Miller.
Here.
Vice Chair Smith.
Here.
Gibbons.
Here.
Sinks.
Here.
Liger.
Here.
Tyson.
Here.
Rennie.
Here.
Montano.
Here.
Elahi.
Present.
Yulo.
Here.
Abekoga.
Here.
Thank you. Let me check real fast to see if Tovar has joined us yet. No, thank you. We have Ellenberg and Tovar absent.
Okay, great. Next up is public comment on matters not on the agenda. Any member may address the board on matters not on the agenda. If you wish to speak to us at this time, please indicate that by raising your virtual hand, or if you've called in on the phone, please press *9. Seeing nobody who wants to comment on non-agendized items, we are going to go to the consent calendar. The consent calendar contains our items of routine business that would normally be taken in one motion. However, there are a couple special items on here, and I think we need to look to our general counsel. So Greg, if you could make a statement.
Yes, I need to make a statement with respect to item 1D, which is amendment number 3 to the employment agreement for the chief executive officer. And just to note that there are 2 changes to be made by this amendment. The first one is an increase in the CEO's annual salary. It increases from $315,000 per year to $351,000 per year, effective October 4. The other change is to coincide the term of the agreement to our fiscal year. So it'll now run from October 1 to September 31, and we'll renew each year unless either party gives a 3-month notice of non-renewal.
So for completeness, right, we did meet in closed session last time, and you gave the negotiating committee authority to go off and do this. So Margaret, Nancy, and I negotiated this agreement within the parameters that we had determined last time. And we also, per the direction, thought that syncing up the contract with our fiscal year and our strategic planning efforts, so everything perfectly aligned, and Girish was amenable to that. 2 comments on the salary, right? We made sure that he was compensated fairly relative to the other people in similar jobs within the area. And then the last thing, which I'm just going to throw the English on, which is it was a challenging year last year with COVID and all of that. And, you know, SVCE has done extraordinarily well relative to other CCAs. And for all the complex goals and objectives that we gave, we've actually had a stellar year. So we are very pleased with our CEO and his performance, and the organization as a whole and their performance. So that's the backdrop that brought us to the contract amendment. So back on the consent calendar, does anybody have any items that they wish to pull from the consent calendar for discussion? Let me check with the public. Is there any member of the public that wishes to speak to an item on the consent calendar? If you wish to do so, indicate by raising your virtual hand. If you're on the phone, press *9. Seeing none, I will come back to the board. I need a motion still, and if anybody would like to make any comments on anything, this would be a good time. Nancy, I saw your hand shoot up.
Yeah, I move the consent calendar. Second.
Okay, so I think that was Nancy, and then Liz. Does anybody want to make a comment? You guys aren't going to tell her she did a good job.
Yeah, I was just going to comment, if I may, that the CEO has received strong support from the board, but I appreciate the chair's comment that the staff has significantly contributed to the success of the organization over this last difficult year, and wanted to thank them as well.
Yeah, here to the staff of Silicon Valley Clean Energy. They make it all go. It's amazing. Any
Yeah.
other comments? Go ahead, Nancy.
I'll pile on and say thanks to the CEO for helping lead us through a difficult year, and we are in a good position to address whatever comes up in the future, and wanted to recognize the performance. So very happy to support the motion. Or I mean, I made it, so let me rephrase that. I'm hoping my colleagues will support the motion that I made, and Director Gibbons seconded.
Excellent. Thank you. Any final thoughts by anyone? Then let's just do this. We'll go to the clerk for a roll call vote, please.
Thank you. Chair Miller,
Aye.
Vice Chair Smith,
Yes.
Gibbons,
Yes.
Sinks,
Aye.
Flagger,
Yes.
Tyson,
Yes.
Rennie,
Yes.
Montano,
Yes.
Elahi,
Yeah.
thank you. Yulo,
Yes.
Abekoga,
Aye.
thank you. That motion carries with Ellenberg and Tovar absent.
All right. Thank you guys for that.
Yes.
Item 2 is our CEO report, and I'm sure there's going to be some filling in maybe, but we'll start with Garish.
Thank you, Chair Miller, members of the board. Couple of items. One is the $12 million customer relief program that you approved at the start of the pandemic. We are moving forward on all 3 fronts quite well. Most of the rebates on the residential side, it's almost 100% done. To low-income customers have got the credits. On the commercial side, the initial stage of responses was not great. So Don and his team have made additional efforts, and we're getting much better response. So we're about 75% done there. And the last one is the community resiliency grants for about $5 million to deal with PSPS events. That's the longer 2-year program. And that is also going quite well. Results of the RFP for the community planning efforts just came in this week. So that whole program is moving forward, and we have some slides explaining it, but just wanted to keep you updated. I now want to move to have 2 of our staff members give you an update on the outages we suffered August 14th and 15th. So we're going to do a twosome. We're going to have Ian Williams, Power Resources Manager, basically tell you what happened on a physical basis. And then afterwards, Pamela Leonard, our Communications Manager, is going to talk to you about the outreach efforts that we made and you all made to get customers to reduce use, which helped us in avoiding blackouts in many of the days subsequent to the 14th and 15th. Once they're done, after Pam speaks, I will talk to you for about a minute on what CalCCA has communicated to the governor's office this morning related to the blackouts. Ian?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. So I wanted to kind of go into the details of what's happened. I'm sure you've heard many different stories. There's been a lot of blame being thrown around between different agencies and different types of generators and what's on the grid. And I wanted to kind of use an analogy that I've kind of shared with the team. One of the market participants described what's happened as the murder on the Orient Express. There's a lot to blame, and everybody was blamed, or everyone should receive blame for what's happened. So I want to talk about 4 things: the causes that led up to the event, what actually happened, what we learned from the first 2 days that helped us prevent what happened on the second heat wave, and finally, how did SVCE perform during this difficult period. So the causes that led up to this event, The capacity in the state, especially for flexible resources, has been declining for the last 10 years. And those flexible resources are very necessary as we start dealing with more renewable integration, especially for kind of the steep neck of the duck in the evenings. In addition, again, there's been many natural gas retirements, and California also relies upon imports from the Pacific Northwest and the desert Southwest, especially during hot days. And those regions are also having retirements of units and also increasing their RPS requirements in the various areas. And then finally, it's difficult in terms of planning and forecasting. What's the right forecast to use when you're looking at reliability? Should you be using a 50% 1 in 2 type environment, or should you be using a more extreme 1 in 10 type environment as you're planning for these extreme hot days? So what happened? There's extreme heat throughout the West. So in the Pacific Northwest, California, and the desert Southwest, temperatures were 10 to 20 degrees above normal. And I said it happened all at the same time. On the 14th, there was a natural gas plant unit that tripped, and there were outages with other natural gas units and derates natural gas units. Natural gas units tend to produce less when it's hot outside. There's an ambient derate issue with them. And also it's been a below average hydro year for California, and there was less hydro available during that day. There was a flex ramp issue in terms of the software at the CAISO. The CAISO didn't have enough flexible ramping capacity for certain periods. And when that was tripped, it doesn't allow CAISO to lean on other balancing authorities in other states to bring in power. So that was a problem. And then finally, there was a question of the state issued flexible flex alerts, flex 1, flex 2. The question is, how much contingency reserves should the state hold on to meet load, to maybe cause a smaller blackout versus having a statewide or WEC-wide blackout? And so that was a question of what were the operating reserves and where should we be? On the 15th, again, we had some similar issues. On the 14th, high loads, it was hot. There were some issues actually with some wind variability and the gas flexibility to be able to meet that variability. During the fluctuations of the wind, one of the gas units tripped, and that caused a flex ramp. That caused the stage 3 outage, basically. Finally, what did we learn on the next day to help us prepare for the 17th and 18th? The state issued both a lot of demand side actions as well as supply side actions. On the demand side, kudos to the state of California. Everybody who's tuned into the CAISO. I call this demand response 1.0. Everybody was trying to do they were getting the alerts on Twitter and texts and various people. And so, you know, we did a very good job of trying to reduce our load during those peak hours. Also, the Navy helped remove some ships from the grid, which helped on the demand side. And Silicon Valley data centers actually were able to disconnect from the grid and use backup power, which helped. On the supply side, the CAISO issued a CPM for some extra resources to come online. Public Power helped in terms of LADWP and SMUD, some of the munis who are outside of the CAISO, helped deliver more energy. And then finally, some of the water agencies helped create more supply during peak hours in terms of how they manage their water for water use. So how did SVCE do during this timeframe? We were very well prepared. From a resource adequacy, which is our measure of reliability, we were actually long during the month of August, and especially we were long flex capacity, which is important to meet that ramp. So we were stellar in terms of making sure that we were not contributing to these issues. From a hedging perspective, we were at 100% of plan according to our risk management policy. And you know, we weathered the storm as well as we could, again, following all of our risk management policies and making sure that our resource adequacy was was adequate. Happy to take some questions. And if not, we can talk about Pam, we can go to Pam to talk about what we're doing in terms of a communication and marketing.
If you don't mind, board members, let's get Pam's update, then I'll talk about the Cal CCA stuff, and then we'll get all the questions at one time.
Okay, excellent, perfect.
Okay, good evening, directors. Pamela Leonard here. I want to thank you all so much for your support in getting communications out during these heat wave and flex alert power emergencies that we've experienced last month and this month. Appreciate you all being receptive to the many email updates that we were providing during this time. In August in particular, we hadn't been called on before as CCAs by the governor's office specifically to do outreach to our customers with conservation messaging. So this was the first time that this had happened. Typically, Flex Alert information is shared by PG&E and directly through flexalert.org. But over that weekend of August 15th and 16th, we did a message from Cal CCA that the governor's office had reached out and did ask us to proactively do outreach to our customers. So we did everything that we could with our existing channels, of course, really heavily relying on the relationships that we have with our member jurisdictions. So relying on all of you and really appreciate all of you sending out information on your public channels. We sent during both months, we were a bit more prepared for September. Of course, we saw the Flex Alert advanced warning. We were able to get messaging out to member city staff and PIOs. We're able to also get messaging that was utilized by the Santa Clara Office of Emergency Management, which was great that they were able to put messaging out through Nextdoor countywide. And we were able to get some messaging translated into other languages. So there was also, some other actions we're able to take with direct emails to our customers, those that have subscribed to our mailings. We're looking into the future how we can enhance maybe direct email communications or other means of communications to customers when we aren't seeing those happen, perhaps in a more timely manner from PG&E, for example. There was also, of course, some media that came right out of the first incidents in August, criticizing clean energy for the outages and the problems that we're facing. So we were very quick to gather or to partner up with our regional CCAs, and Supervisor Ellenberg co-authored an op-ed explaining that this is a much bigger issue beyond, it's not clean energy, and how CCAs are looking at storage and long duration storage and other technology solutions to prevent these outages in the future. So continuing to learn a lot on the communications front, and again, really appreciate all of your support and that of your member community staff in helping to get the messaging out.
Thank you, Pam. Lastly, Cal CCA has sent a letter to the governor's office making 4 points. The letter was sent this morning. First, that the PUC should continue to ensure adequate supplies are going to be in place for summer 2021, and they should utilize the procurement track of the IRP process, and also review the import restrictions that were in place in context of lessons learned. Second, requesting that the legislature enact AB 3014 to establish the Central Reliability Authority, which would allow for a public agency to buy RA capacity when necessary for backstop purposes. Number 3, California should support the expansion of the federal income tax credit, investment tax credit, to standalone energy storage resources and the removal of charging restrictions, limiting the flexibility of battery energy storage to support the state's ramping. So basically allowing grid power to charge the batteries. And the last recommendation is to recommend that the governor appoint an independent review panel to consider the results of the root cause analysis. The governor has ordered an investigation, but we are asking for an independent panel to review the investigation because it is the PUC and the CAISO that'll be looking at the root cause analysis and pretty much investigating themselves. So there are lots of lessons to be learned, and we will be on top of it. There will be more regulatory proceedings as a result of this, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in context of the budget coming up in item 4. That's all we have on this. We are open for questions, Chair Miller.
Sure, let's start off with Tony since he got his hand up right away.
Thanks, Howard. I had a question first I had two questions. The first one is for Ian. Ian, you said that we were 100% hedged to plan, as we should be, month of. But you didn't say how much we actually had to procure above that and be exposed to the open market. Can you give us some background on that or data?
Chris and Monica, can you give me guidance on what we're supposed to discuss?
Yeah, sure. I'll just start off with this a little bit. Provide the short picture that we had, 20% and the dollars that we impacted by, please.
Sure. So again, we were 100% hedged to plan, and we were probably on the peak days, probably 20% short. So we were exposed to the market. And right now, I think our last check, again, we get this data every 8 days and we get the final data every 55 days. We're about 2.5 million in terms of our day ahead imbalance, in terms of what we had to procure in the market outside of our hedges.
So a total of $2.5 million?
2.5 million. That's our first estimate.
Thanks. Second question is for you, Girish. The CalCCA letter discussed passage of some legislation. Obviously, that can't happen this year with the legislature in recess, for the session. But has there been any discussion about making this a big to-do and asking for a special session while the iron is hot? I'm not sure it's smart. I'm asking the question of people in the know kind of bannered about that idea.
Yeah, when we've talked to our lobbyists about the possibility of a special session, that was actually discussed even in terms of COVID, right? Because the legislature really couldn't get all their work done. So there's been discussion about a special session. We haven't heard of a special session around energy issues. They have to list the issues they're going to deal with in the special session. So we don't know yet. We just heard chatter about it, but nothing definite. My sense of it is they're going to wait till they get get the root cause analysis at least from the agencies.
Yeah, given the spot market, I feel lucky that the impact was as small as it was, because the world was crazy out there. Other questions? Think about it. Let me check with the public. Is there any member of the public that wishes to comment on this item? If you wish to do so, please indicate by raising your virtual hand. Okay, I'm coming back to the board. I don't see any hands up. Does anyone have?
I have a question.
Oh, there you go. Carmen, please. Sorry.
So Eon, you mentioned that most of the source of the problem was it was really hot in the Southwest. So is that because we contract out a lot of the solar farms in that area?
It's primarily the Desert Southwest, CAISO, and the Pacific Northwest are all linked. Think of it as one big grid. And we tend to import power. They tend to have excess, but they tend not to have excess when it's extremely hot in Seattle and extremely hot in Las Vegas and Phoenix. So it's just, again, we rely on imports, and when it's coincidentally hot across the entire West, there's just fewer imports to come into California. They have to meet their load and have their reserves.
Yeah, I was going to say maybe we should diversify more in different areas that aren't so prone to extreme weather conditions in the as you know the heat. But you said it was even in Seattle. Is that what you said? That even
Yeah,
there was hot?
Seattle is very warm. I think on one of the days it might have gotten up to 95 degrees, which is extremely hot for Seattle.
Yeah, so it's out of the ordinary. Okay, well at least it's understandable now. So why that happened? Thank you.
Yeah, it's understandable, but always unfortunate. Thank you, Carmen.
Yeah, thank you.
Lisa?
Thanks, Chair. I think my question is for Pamela on the community engagement and communication. As many of you know, Los Altos still has not passed REACH codes. I think it's on our agenda for September 22nd. But during the blackouts, we received a lot of communication from residents who are now claiming that's a reason why you should vote against REACH codes. And I'm wondering whether or not you received any types of communication similar to that, and if you had a response for that.
So we haven't received any information about that, but I think one of the things that we definitely have seen a continued need to do just over the years as an agency is to explain the difference between, you know, SVCE's role as an energy supplier, a load serving entity, and of course the way that the grid works. What we did also see a lot of more in San Jose, but we know that there were also issues in Los Altos Hills and maybe in Los Altos too, is that there were local distribution level outages. This was something that was brought up in the op-ed that was written because there was this, you know, statewide media coverage about rolling outages, and there were local distribution level outages. So needing to clear that up, of course, is continuing to be important. So appreciate you letting us know about some local issues. Always want to hear from you if you're seeing those kinds of things, and letting us know how we can maybe send out some clarifying information about our role.
If I could interject just a little bit. NISA's in probably one of the harder positions of any of us because there's sort of an active anti-Silicon Valley clean energy movement in your city. And
that's an understatement, Chair, but yes.
Yes. My request was actually going to be directed at staff. If we could give NISA some really clear talking points about the system issues that caused this, that were contributing factors, and clarity that Silicon Valley Clean Energy did procure the amount of energy we were supposed to, in fact, even over, and that we have fulfilled our obligations for resource adequacy. And just because I know some of your people in Los Altos, it doesn't hurt to say how many hundreds of thousands of dollars the residents of Los Gatos. I just feel like NISA's going to need a little bit of a backup sheet with some really solid talking points, because they're coming after you. Sorry, because they hate us. So on your behalf, NISA, I'm kind of asking if you and staff could get together and get that solid, because I don't want to lose Los Altos as a player in this organization.
No, I appreciate that, and that's a good idea. So if it's possible, staff, I really appreciate it. Thanks, Pamela and Garish.
If I may add, we are working on that already. So Don Bray is taking the lead, and we are putting together some information around, basically, there's some putting together the factual information around what actually happened. And the CEO of the California Independent System Operator and categorically stated that renewable power was not the problem, this outage. So I've also sent an email to the board with 3 articles around the rolling outages. I sent that last week, but I think we'll work with you, NISA, to get you some talking points in electrification too.
Yeah, I just hate to see one of our guys and, you know, our esteemed board members, I'm too casual, in the crosshairs. And man, I feel bad for you and your city, because we've done so good for the residents of Los Altos, but there's still this vocal minority that's really stirring it there. So.
Yeah, there's something about Los Altos. I don't know what it is, because even on the cities, even on the cities association that I serve on, there's this. Anyway.
Okay, so.
Thank you, Carmen.
First, let me, Tony, your hand went up and then went down. Are you good? And then Rob Rennie.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond a little bit to Nisa. I think the argument from those people are probably going to be that, you know, if you electrify, you're contributing to the problem when there's not enough electricity, except as far as I can tell, most air conditioners are electric, and that was really what the big problem was. And if you think about it, if your house is really hot, do you really want to turn on your gas stove and blast heat all over the place, or do you want a nice induction one that transfers directly to the pot? So I think there's some other things to think about in there.
Thank you, Rob. Tony?
Sure, Howard. I was going to just say staff from the city of Morgan Hill will be happy to contribute to the staff effort at some talking points on Reach Code.
That's nice.
Nisa, do you need us?
Feel free to attend our meeting on September 22nd as well.
Nisa, if you could send out that information, there's a few of us who are actually crazy enough to Zoom in and say good things. So if you could forward that to everybody on the board.
I will.
Yeah.
We expect a lot of people to attend.
Yeah, well, all for one and one for all. We're with you.
That's right.
Javed?
Yeah, I guess the Montessori model might be something, and maybe the staff has already done that for Los Altos. I mean, we had Dawn come and do a full-blown presentation just to the citizens. Then they did a full-blown presentation in front of the city council, and there was another presentation that we had done in front of the Rotary Club. So we did about 3 presentations, and we had some diehards on our city council and in the citizen, but eventually, those things seem to work, and we were able to get some reach codes fast. So if Los Altos, it might be helpful. You may have already tried all these.
We have, and I know we're getting off topic, but we've done surveys, we've done community outreach. We have already had one council meeting last year where SVCE also staff there to present. So I'm not sure we can convince
yeah, some people will not be sure.
The more support, the better. And so I will send the information for the September 22nd meeting.
All right.
Might I ask, have there been any council members that have expressed concerns about our organization?
If I can just interrupt her, we're getting a little bit off the topic with respect to what's on the agenda. So I think we probably should get back to our main topic here.
Thank you.
Greg could tell I was diverting my eyes away from his corner of the screen. Sorry, Nisa, but we're with you, whatever it takes. Is there any other questions or comments on the CEO report?
I have one more item to bring up. So I would like to introduce our newest team member, who is a climate fellow, Vanessa Shen, who is also on the call. And Vanessa is from Hawaii, and that's where she is attending from. And so let me hand it over to Vanessa to introduce herself to the board.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much again for the warm welcome and for the opportunity to introduce myself. So my name is Vanessa Shin, and I am SVCE's new Community Outreach Fellow. I'm originally from Honolulu, Hawaii, but I moved to the Bay Area to study environmental science at Santa Clara University. Most recently, I completed an AmeriCorps fellowship with the City of Cupertino Sustainability Division, in which I supported the implementation of Cupertino's Climate Action Plan. And that's actually how I first learned about SVCE, and I became really interested in seeing how community choice energy and just SVCE in general has been able to make huge progress on municipal climate action goals. So I'm really excited to be here. I feel like I'm joining the team in such a important and dynamic time. And yeah, thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah, thank you for joining us in our mission to change the world. We're not just happy getting some clean electricity on the grid. We really want to make this a better place for everybody. And since I can't see Greg, hopefully you can attend the Los Altos Council meeting coming up soon. We appreciate that you've chosen to join us, and I hope that you find this place as exciting and as quickly and ever changing as we do. So welcome.
that's all I have in my report. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Grish. Okay, everybody, are we good on this item? Nobody's raising and flagging hands, and we're going to move on. Next up is item 3, which is our strategic plan update. So, Grish.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Miller. And we can go to slide 2, please, Andrea. So I wanted to bring this back to the board for 2 reasons. One is you all had a chance to provide feedback in August, but this is a good reminder. I also wanted to say that I found this process that we use this year much more useful than the process that I had the last 2 years. I think the last 2 years we went with the exact strategic planning document, and we made edits to it and presented it to you. And I think it was just too wordy. Whereas this year, focusing on just the big picture, what are those focus areas? I thought that the discussion we had with the board was very rich and useful. I do want to make a point that a lot of the work we do and a lot of the money we spend is not in here. That continues to be work that's in our strategic plan, and we're going to continue to do that. These are additional things that we're going to be focusing on over the next 2 years. So we've funded many of these, but not all. So the second reason I wanted to bring this up is it'll be something I'll bring up throughout the year to plug into the recommendations I'll be making. So for example, in November and December of this year, I'll be coming back to you in terms of a couple of new positions I'll be looking for to deal with some of these focus areas. And we'll tee that up in the budget also. And then I have one more slide, the next one, which kind of talks about the overall process we use at SVCE over an annual period to keep ourselves connected to our strategic plan. So right now, this year, we're talking, the yellow areas are the focus areas that we're adopting today. And then we'll update the strategic plan document itself and provide a shorter document at the October meeting. And then you'll have a chance, you've set my goals already, and you'll have a chance to evaluate me on those goals in the next year, and then set the next year's focus areas also. So we have a kind of iterative plan, and appreciate the board's support on it. And we've evolved and kind of created this together. So I think it's working well so far. But I wanted to make sure that if you can go back to the previous slide, kind of leave with this. If there are any questions you have on the strategic plan and focus areas, I'd be happy to answer it at this time. Thank you.
It is good to have a strategic plan that's aligned with the budget, that's aligned with the CEO goals. That makes us special. Is there anyone who has questions for Grish at this time? I'm seeing no hands. And let me check with the public. Is there any member of the public that wishes to comment on this item? If you wish to do so, please indicate by raising your virtual hand. If you're on the phone, press *9. I'm not seeing anybody on the phone. Okay, I'm seeing nobody from the public. I'll come back to the board. Or are there any questions or comments? This was a discussion, so anybody's got any things to say? I think I cheated it, Grish. The fact that we come back to this strategic plan and we talk about alignment of our goals and our budget and our staffing and our mission, this helps us stay laser focused. And this is one of our strengths. And I'm grateful for the frequency with which you bring strategic plan update discussions to us. So we're all on the same page. So not seeing anybody jumping up, we are going to move on from that item. Next one is item 4, which is adopt the fiscal year operating budget.
Okay. Well, good evening, everyone. It's great to be with you again. We're going to go over the budget. It is very similar to what we went over just 4 weeks ago. So I'll try not to belabor too many of the same points, but did want to highlight a number of things. So if we could move to the next slide. Let's start out with our favorite roadmap here. We're at stop number 4 at this point. where the budget has been seen. This will be the third time now. We presented once to the Finance Committee and then to this board 4 weeks ago. And so we're going to present again the recommended budget for adoption tonight. The next stop along the way that Girish just went over is the strategic plan, which we're talking about this month and next. And then finally, just a reminder that this isn't the first or the last bite at the apple, so to speak, that we plan on having a mid-year review early in the next calendar year. Since the industry we're in can be volatile, it's always good to have that check-in to make sure we're still on track. Okay, next slide, please. So some of the highlights, these have not changed from the last time. I wanted to start right out by saying, again, given such an unusual year, it's good to start out by saying SVCE is financially stable. Despite all that's gone on this year, we expect the end of the year with reserves of $8.2 million to add to our cash reserves. That's a little bit less than what I showed you 4 weeks ago, so we'll explain the difference there. And then jumping to highlight number 3, the budget assumes that 1% discount from PG&E that we talked about last time. And then highlight number 2, it also assumes decreased costs, energy costs because of the COVID pandemic, and also 2 new positions that we'll mention as well. Next slide, please. So these assumptions are the same as we talked about last month. So again, I won't belabor them, but it does include the PG&E discount of 1%. PCIA costs, we have an assumption that it'll go up in the fall and then fall back again in early next year. So that's built into the budget here this evening. And the other assumptions are the same as last time as well. Next slide, please. So this is a high-level summary of the dollars. We'll break it down a little bit in a slide or two, but $264 million for energy revenues, and that includes the load reduction we've talked about, the PCI increase, and then $234 million in energy costs. Leaves us with just under $30 million of operating margin. And from that, of course, comes all of the non-energy operating costs, plus the programs. We have $5.3 million in programs and another $400,000 in capital expenditures, which leaves us with that $8.2 million in reserves at the end of the year, or to add to reserves, which we'll show you in the next slide, please. This we looked at last time as well. It leaves us comfortably within that blue band in the middle, that a little over 200 days of cash on hand. So well within the policy ranges, a little bit above the middle of the policy range for our cash reserves. So that's a good place to be. And it provides us that's really our main backstop to go to when things get really volatile, and if we need to make any adjustments. It's good to have this cash reserves as an insurance policy. Next slide, please. So this is just a snapshot, kind of a condensed version of the budget, just to show you the changes between 4 weeks ago in that proposed budget in the first column, and then the recommended budget tonight. You'll see that the main difference, or the only difference, is $197,000 additional added to operating expenses, which I'll break down in the next slide. And it leaves us with the $8.2 million balance available for reserves at the end of the year. So in the next slide, please, we'll look at that. So some of the changes, just so you have an idea of how that $197,000 breaks out that was added since the last time we looked at this. We increased the regulatory consulting budget to allow us to have some additional dollars to follow up on the rolling blackout and work with the CAISO and the CPUC. Some organizational review funding. We're a new organization, but maturing a bit, so it's a good time to take a look at all of our internal policies and procedures and still make sure they still make sense as SVCE matures. Some dollars for upfront costs related to the power prepay we've been talking about. We believe that most of this can be repaid later through the financing process, but there are some upfront costs to start with. And then finally, some additional dollars for work from home costs related to our employees, like a broadband internet or some equipment that they may need. So those are a few items that got added since last time we wanted to break out for you. Next slide, please. On the personnel side, just as a reminder, in the current fiscal year, we have 29 full-time equivalent employees, and then the 2 new positions that are included in this budget, the data scientist and the power resources analyst, would bring it to 31 full-time equivalent positions and 5 temporary positions. But just as a heads up, I think Garish alluded to this earlier, we are looking ahead and later this year do at this point plan on bringing back a request for some additional positions. We weren't quite in a place to be able to say, yes, we're ready to ask for these positions right now, but later this year, we believe we will be to help with additional government relations issues and another power resource analyst position as well. Next slide, please. So some other forward-looking ideas that we wanted to make sure to flesh out, some of which we've already talked about, like the additional regulatory work related to the CAISO and the CPUC, and coordinating through CalCCA, especially because of some of the rolling blackouts we had last month. Make sure that the CCAs in general and SVCE in particular that were well represented during that whole process. And second bullet there, just a continued volatility. This is why I emphasize the mid-year review, because there is always going to be ups and downs. We talked a little bit about that just from last month, the additional dollars from the rolling blackout days that we had when power costs went up. So that's going to, events like that impact the budget, and that's why we want to take a look at it at mid-year, make sure we're still on track. And then also looking forward to better defining and expanding on some of the equity programs we'd like to put in place as well. Next slide, please. So that is an overview of the budget for this year, and what we're looking or asking for tonight is approval of the 2021 operating budget. And that's all I had, and happy to try to answer any questions for you.
All right, that's great. So does anybody have any questions right off? Seeing none, let me double check with the public. Is there any member of the public that wishes to comment on this item? If you wish to do so, please indicate by raising your virtual hand. Seeing no comments from the public, I'll come back to us. And just for the public, I gotta just put this out there, Garish, right? There is so much work that goes into making sure that we're all prepared before these board meetings, that a complicated item like the budget, we've all had opportunity to discuss with you and discuss with the finance director and obviously read ourselves. And so I don't want the lack of detailed questions to indicate that we're not paying attention. I just want to point out that we show up pretty well prepared. Thank you. Thank you, Garish, and thank the members of the staff who've helped us individually. Anyway, Tony.
Thanks, Howard. I just wanted to add on to that, and just in case anyone's wondering, yes, prepared. This is the second time we've seen this budget. As Dawn indicated, we saw, a longer presentation a month ago. And yes, we're individually prepared, but certainly there's no discussion amongst board members making decisions beforehand. I don't want anyone to get the wrong idea about anything along those lines. It's just individual discussions, and every individual has ample opportunity to have his or her questions answered before the meetings.
Okay, are there any other questions about the budget? Liz, who's raising a real hand, go ahead.
So I was just going to comment similarly that the board is organized with committees, and there's the executive committee, and then there's the audit committee, the finance and administrative committee, and so forth, all of which have an opportunity early on to have a presentation from staff and to ask our questions and reinforce what the presentation needs for the board's full understanding of the issues. And so it is a well-faceted series of meetings and some hard questions asked to get to the point we are at this evening.
Garish, you want to comment?
Yeah, just to add a little more detail to what board members have said. Just before Don Eckert left, we made sure that we had a budget update as to what was coming up in the coming year. So we had that. Then we had the finance committee meeting, and then we had the board meeting last month. So this is the fourth time you're getting to see this. So I'm sorry, so many repetitions, but it makes for good buy-in and of the budget.
Okay. Well, let me make just sort of what I think the big picture summary is that we remain well in the black. We're funding our programs and our initiatives. We're adding the staff that we need to continue to fulfill the mission, and we are very aggressive in the mission that we're undertaking. And I cannot say that every CCA in the state of California is in as good a financial shape as we are. And on top of all of that, taking care of our customers, giving our customers a slight discount to PG&E, we're still funding the programs, and we are still putting money into our reserves. And we have over 180 days of reserve targeted in this budget, plus our line of credit on top of that. We are exceptionally well capitalized and very solvent and fiscally prudent. And so given the uncertain times and the craziness in the energy market, I am grateful for our financial strength. And like I like to say, I love having an exceptionally creative staff, and I'm grateful that in finance we have an exceptionally conservative staff. So we make it all come together. So if somebody wouldn't mind, we're going to need a motion for this one because it is going to be officially approved.
I would be happy to move it.
Don't we have to go to the public?
I asked the public already.
You did. All right. That snuck right by me.
I could ask again.
I'd be happy to move in, and I'm thrilled with the reserve that this budget affords.
Second.
Okay, so there was a specifically attached budget resolution, which I think is 2026, right? Yeah, too many 20s in there. So that's what our motion is, and I think that's what we need for this. Are there any other comments or questions? Let me, on behalf of the board, thank the staff, thank our Don, who's the third Don to weigh in on all of us. Thank you, Don, and thank you, Garish, and thank you everyone who's had a hand in this. And we'll go to the clerk if we could get a roll call vote, please.
Thank you. Chair Miller?
Aye.
Vice Chair Smith?
Yes.
Gibbons?
Yes.
Sinks?
Aye.
Fliger?
Yes.
Tyson?
Yes.
Rennie?
Yes.
Montano,
Yes.
Elahi,
Yes.
Yulo,
Aye.
Abikoga. Aye. Thank you. That motion carries unanimously with Tovar and Ellenberg absent.
Well, we got more ayes that time, but we had a lot of yeses, so that's all good.
Yeah.
All right, our next item up is an update on the long-term power prepay agreement. And we'll start with Garish again.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Miller, members of the board. Our Risk Oversight Committee and the Finance Committee has had a chance to look at this over the last year and most recently about a month or so ago. I also want to say that we have our financial advisor, Michael Berwanger, on the line in the meeting with us. So if we could go to the, we're going to talk about this concept called the power prepay. For some of the board members, it's the first time you're hearing about it. So let me tee this up by going to slide number 2. And essentially what we are asking is, the purpose of this presentation is, we want to take some steps to being ready when the financial markets are ready, when interest rates are in the right place, to enter into a 30-year power prepay arrangement that could reduce the costs by 8 to 12%. It translates to about $3 million a year. So next slide. So I'm going to go over what the business case is for a power prepay, and also talk about timeline, next steps, and what I'm asking for. So essentially, the power prepay allows for, there's a benefit, the municipal utilities are allowed to issue debt to prepay power, and that the benefit comes from the difference in interest rates between the taxable interest rate and the tax exempt interest rate. So we as a municipal entity can issue tax exempt debt. And we can basically leverage that tax exempt debt through this arrangement, which is called a power prepay arrangement, to get some benefits which are derived from the difference between the taxable debt and tax exempt debt. So next slide. In California, we've had 11 such deals done over the last 15 years. And the deals get done once interest rates are in the right place, when the delta between taxable and tax exempt rates are in the right place. So as you can see here, a variety, if you look at the last column, a variety of cities and municipal utilities have taken advantage of this. So more than 5.7 billion has been, of deals have been done over the last 15 years. Over the same period across the country, there's been somewhere between 90 to 100 deals done. So we are not cutting edge on this. The thing that we're doing is a little different, is similar to what the last deal on December 2018 looks like. So SMUD has gone into a 30-year prepay arrangement, with the first 15 years being on natural gas, and then the remaining 15 years on renewable electricity. What we're thinking about is it's mostly going to be, or all going to be, renewable electricity. So essentially, a variety of entities have taken advantage of this opportunity. Next slide, please. So how much of a savings would we get? This is about 8 to 12%, which translates into about $3 million a year. Next slide. So when we enter into a deal like this, we wouldn't be the ones issuing the bonds. We'd have a municipal conduit that actually issues the bonds. And one of the key things on this deal is these are non-recourse bonds, which means there is no recourse to us as SVCE. The term of the agreement, we'd like to make it as long as possible, and that would be about 30 years. And essentially, if the program terminates early, what we lose is our benefit. So today, we have a certain cost, right? So you looked at the budget that you just passed. So just say, for example, our budget for the next year on power costs is $235 million. If we take about 10% of our costs and put it through this program, we would save about $3 million. So our budget would come down to 232. So if the program stops, all that would happen is we'll go back to the status quo of the $235 million. So that's the risk in this program. And the other risk we have is our staff time. So here there's a little bit of a repetition in the text, where on the last bullet, how we get the savings. It's generated by the difference between the taxable borrowing cost of the prepaid supplier and our tax exempt rate. Next slide, please. So over here, again, there's a lot of text to the right, but essentially what we are looking at here is what I just mentioned about, if the program terminates early, we forego future savings, and whatever assigned contracts we put in the program returns to status quo. The prepaid supplier or the bank, they are responsible for the tax exempt debt, and it is non-recourse to SVCE. It doesn't show up on our balance sheet. So we're looking at these tax exempt bonds, which will be refinanced about 5 to 7 years. And so again, over here, the last bullet talks about the risk. If the bank doesn't perform and cannot remarket the bonds, or if we need to exit the prepay, we just go back to our original contract terms. Next slide. So this is where it comes to what I'm asking for from the board. So we essentially, when you're doing a financial deal like this, it takes several months to get all the documentation ready so that we can act when interest rates are in the right place. So that's what the title of this slide is. It's getting ready. It's allowing SVCE to transact when the spread is at the right spot. It'll take us about 6 months to get there. And what I plan to do is have the presentation to you today. Actually, go to the next slide, please. So there are two things that we're looking for, right? So one is we need to form a bond conduit JPA to actually issue the bonds. And second, we need to work on getting all the documentation and the transaction, the deal structure in place. So the bond conduit, we are working with 3 other CCAs, and on the actual prepay arrangement, we're working with one other CCA. The professionals who are involved in developing this documentation, especially the second one, the transaction terms, they get their fees typically paid for when we issue bonds. So they do their work on contingency, and they get paid at that time when the bonds actually get issued. So these are the two. The first one, the bond conduit formation, it costs about $60,000. 4 of us are working on it, so it's about $15,000 a piece. I've already committed our $15,000 to that. Of course, the actual joining of a JPA will come back to you as a board. Next slide. In terms of timing, so we've talked to the Finance Committee about this in August. In September, we're here on the second green bar. We plan to take it to the Finance Committee for a second discussion on September 15th, and then come back to you on October 14th. So when I come back on October 14th, what I'll be asking for is for you to give me authority to engage these professionals to get ready for when the interest rates would be at the right place. And it takes about 6 months. And so I have to sign contracts with underwriter counsel, disclosure counsel, the municipal financial advisor, et cetera, to get everything ready to actually enter into this transaction. So I won't actually be committing money, but I'll be committing us to pay if and when a deal goes through. So that's the risk. The risk will be on the professionals. So we're working that out right now. There may be a little bit of upfront payment. We put that in our budget already. So the third blue box here talks about the documentation and transaction terms. It'll take us about 2 quarters to complete that. And once we are done with that, it's just going to be a matter of when the financial markets are ready. And when the interest rates are in the right place, we'll bring it back to you for your decision at that time. So next slide. And this will be my last slide. So my request today is I'd like you to provide feedback on this initiative and basically direct us to work with the Finance Committee on the September 15th and also obtain direction to come back to you on October 14th to get final approval to get ready. So those are my next steps. That is all I have in the presentation. I do have a number of addendum slides, which the Finance Committee will go through, but just for extra credit, if any of you may have taken a look at it, but we do have a lot of information that we'll be sharing with the Finance Committee. I am open for questions at this time.
Okay, so just to summarize, Girish, we're only authorizing you to do the work and spend a little bit of money to get ready. But the board will still ultimately have to make a decision when it's time if this is the deal we want to enter into.
Exactly.
Okay. George, you had a question.
Yes, I have a couple questions, and thanks, Girish, for reviewing this with me a couple of days ago. So I had some background in this. I'm just, as I see the timelines, I'm just thinking, how does it take 6 months in today's world to put together something like this? What makes it take so long?
I put 3 to 6 months, and let me ask Mike to step in here because he's done this kind of deal for Scapa to give you an answer to that.
Thanks. Yeah, there's just a lot of documentation that has to be, heavily negotiated. I think, there's been a lot of upfront work as well. So I think, all things come together. 3 months is probably more realistic, but in the transaction, I worked on a lot of those transactions on that slide that Girish presented. And, some of them have taken 6 months or more. There are about 5 different attorneys involved. So it can take some time sometimes.
Okay. My second question is, I noticed in the timeline that there was a flurry in 2007, 8, and then maybe a gap of 7 or 8 years. Is it possible we decide to pull the trigger and then it's 5 years before interest rates actually are favorable?
Girish, you want me to jump in?
Yes,
okay.
yes.
So, yeah, it's very episodic at times. It is purely, the relationship. You want a certain spread between taxable borrowing rates with your counterparty and your borrowing rate on the bonds. What happened was there was a window where everybody transacted in 2007 and 8. And then unfortunately rates dropped and there wasn't enough spread there to create the value that you're capturing. It has, in the last few years, it came back and there's been a flood of transactions. Unfortunately, COVID has kind of turned the world on its head, as we all know. And, we're not there right now. It's impossible to tell, of course, when that might revert. But, there are various scenarios that can play out, which would allow transactions to get done at the end of this year, as early as the end of this year. So I think, the plan is package it up. And when it's ready, don't incur any costs. You're not coming out of pocket, very minimal costs. Standard protocol is everybody's contingent. So that you're in a position to basically pounce when the market's there. And you can do that pretty quickly once you get it to a point. You kind of put it on the shelf, then you take it off the shelf when the market's ready and you get it done.
Thank you.
Sure.
You got more, George? He's on mute, so I think we're going to Javed.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask a basic question. I guess you're talking about having the right arbitrage. If you can explain that in layman's terms, how does that exactly work? The city is selling bonds at the tax exempt rate, and then you said the bank was also had some borrowing costs. Can you explain how this arbitrage actually works?
Sure. Yeah, it's very straightforward. You're borrowing funds at a tax exempt rate over 30 years to advance funds to your taxable counterparty. In this case, it's a bank. The bank values those funds because the bank has funding needs. They have tremendous funding needs. They borrow in the taxable markets. So effectively, their cost of borrowing is typically, a sizable spread above yours, and you're offering them funds at a rate that's a lot lower than what they could otherwise get in their traditional borrowing venues. So, that delta is what creates the arbitrage, and that arbitrage is what creates the value proposition and why you would ever even consider this. So that 8 to 12%, there's a range because markets go up and down, both for you on the tax exempt bond front, as well as the banks in terms of, their various forms of, raising capital.
So are you lending it to the bank for 30 years or for 5 years? For how long?
So the tax code is very clear on this. This is not, you're not loaning them the funds. It is an exchange of money for a good, right? The tax code is very clear. Municipal entities are allowed to prepay for gas and electricity, and in return, what you're getting is a 30-year supply of, whichever commodity, in this case, power. So, it's not a loan, it's not a deposit, it's nothing of the sort. It is, you advanced it, and for 30 years, you expect every year to get that energy. And, Girish sort of alluded to, if just like your PPAs, if you don't receive what you're expecting to get, you're not obligated to, to pay for it. And what happens in that scenario is everything unwinds and you are back to where you are today without this benefit.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Good explanation. Complicated topic. Carmen? Unmute, please. Carmen? Unmute. There
Thank
you
you, Chair. The list of cities or like SMUD that they already have that in place, is it for 30 years or less than 30 years? And then how has that been working out with them?
So, so the issue of, why do 30 and not 5 or 10? The longer you go, the longer the benefit exists, right? The greater the delta, the greater the arbitrage that's created. So you really want to get to max term. 30 years is about as long as you can go. There have been few examples of where people have gone shorter, but they get a lot less savings, basically. All of these transactions have undergone, patchwork over the years, but I think if you went and called any of these folks, SMUD is a great example. SMUD just did their third transaction that's on that list. They have 3 of these in place. The SCAPA folks who did it, SCAPA, much like you guys, is a joint action agency. There's a variety of participants, very familiar. Some participated and some didn't. I would say it's safe to say that the folks that didn't participate, wish they did in that transaction, because they have saved tens of millions of dollars on their cost of gas in that transaction. So these are very valuable. It lowers your costs on one of, for you guys in particular, there's not much that you can do really to sort of lower your power costs. I mean, you're very active in bidding things out. This is something that's very unique to you that offers you a competitive advantage.
Okay, thanks for that clarification.
Sure.
Yeah, using the tax code to our advantage. We're acting like a big company. This is the financial power that improves our finances is a good thing. Yeah. Girish?
Yeah, maybe just to emphasize a point that Mike just made. The majority of our business, Carmen, is buying electricity. And, electricity is a commodity. We can't say that, oh, we have special knowledge that allows us to buy it, at a lower price than someone else on a consistent basis. So we basically have a hedging strategy to kind of stabilize our costs. That's our plan. This particular opportunity gives us a structural advantage, right? Because you can actually lower your cost by a certain percentage. And it's available only to public agencies. So it's just a slight edge that we have. And you want to take every edge you can, and especially when you look at the benefits and risks of a program like this, the risk is very low. You essentially, if the deal unwinds, you give up the benefit that you would get otherwise. Thank you.
All right, other questions? Let me check in with the public. Is there any member of the public that wishes to comment on this item? If you wish to do so, please indicate by raising your virtual hand. I am seeing none. So I will come back to the board for further questions or discussion. Seeing none, I think, Girish, the plan is we're going to see this next month, and you're going to ask for approval to go off and do all the work to get ready.
Correct. And in between, we will talk to the finance committee too.
Yes, excellent. I, for one, am appreciative that we are looking under as my dad would say, looking under every nickel for a dime. Because we don't want to leave. Right? These guys in the big utilities are playing for keeps, and they would just as soon have us find a way to not be in business. And I am super grateful that we are super mindful of all of our financial options to maintain our longevity and fighting power in this space. We're changing the world, and you can't do it without money. And so I am grateful that A, we're being successful at changing the world. Los Altos notwithstanding, we're going to show up and help. And we have money to do it. So this is all good. So thank you, Girish, for bringing this to our attention. So we're going to close out that item. That finishes our agenda. Are there any board announcements or direction for future items? Okay, I'm
Liz would just like to say something there.
Please, Liz.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that I have taken the ROC training, and I wanted to comment that it was very thorough, 20 hours worth of very thorough understanding of what the financial fiduciary business of buying power is all about. And this recent statement that we just had Ian present on about how we got through these heat waves is supported by the training of the board members about the issues and the, I'm going to say that the procedures and steps that have been set up to protect our agency to be successful, financially successful, and understand what we're dealing with. And it's a very good program, very thorough training, and I think staff and our consultants have done a great job with all of the pieces that it takes. So I just wanted to say I was very impressed at what goes into all of that.
Yeah, well, welcome to the ROC. It's a lot. All right, any other announcements or comments? Nisa, you're going to tell us all when your council item comes up, so we're able, if we can, to help. Any other announcements?
Yes.
Oh,
yeah.
Please, I missed the hand.
Yeah.
I believe we have 2 new ROC members, right? Liz is joining and George will join.
Yes.
I appreciate them owning a piece of the ROC.
Yeah,
Yeah, it really is a great committee if you have the time to invest in. It's where a lot of the business of our CCA gets done. So
gets discussed.
I'm glad to see you join. Thank you.
All right, Javed, do you have a comment?
I just had an announcement. The Rotary Club of Los Gatos is going to be holding a mayor's forum with the mayors of Campbell, Los Gatos, and our esteemed Howard Miller also is going to be at that panel. It's going to be on September 23rd at 7:30 a.m. You're all welcome to join us. And I can send you the link if you send me an email. Looking forward to hearing all of you, especially you, Howard.
Yeah, okay, keep your expectations low. Girish?
Yep. Talking about the training, we had Liz and Rob attend, and we've recorded the training. And so if any other board member wants to go through this at their leisure, we'd be happy to send you the link. And we'll also be taking sections of the training for future board orientations. Thank you.
Excellent. All right, any other announcements or comments? Seeing none, then we're going to call this meeting adjourned. I want to thank everybody for being here and participating, and staff for all the effort that they did to get this meeting prepared for us. Thank you, guys. Everybody have a good night.